Sorry, good to go?
Yes, please.
Okay, I think we're going to start. My name is Chief Rachel and I'm based in Ireland. I'm not usually here in Peter's space, but Peter unfortunately has COVID and isn't here today, so I'm sure he'll be back in a few days. But it gave me great pleasure to be in Peter's seat for the evening and to welcome a fantastic scholar who has recently completed a PhD in UCD and who's also a very good friend of mine as well, so it's a serious pleasure. Some of you may know Maire. She recently completed her PhD looking at the history of the Irish colleges in a really, really ambitious study, and a study that I suppose was long awaited. And this is part of a broader project in UCD led by Dr. Rhiannon Nikungo on youth preservation of minoritized languages across Europe. And again, a really fantastic and ambitious project to be involved in, I'm sure. So when was the Viva recently?
The 7th of November.
7th of November, so we have
just recovered now.
Doctor among us, so Kilgard's left. In terms of Maire's work, despite being so early on in her career, she already has a very impressive publication record. She has a peer-reviewed article in Cork entitled "You Cannot Teach the Children of Ireland Irish Until the Teachers Have Got Irish Themselves." Na Cláistí Saoire agus Móna Múnsa na Gaige Níde is a Caragadi Níde Diagfisado. So the Irish colleges and teaching methodologies for Irish from 1904 to 1922. She's also given presentations here already, focusing on her pioneering work on the Irish colleges in Donegal and across Ulster, and I think that should be building on some of that as part of this presentation today. So with no further ado, we'll pass it over to Maire. I'm sure there'll be plenty of questions at the end. Also, we're Agus Asuga Maire Cluster.
Just want to thank Peter and everyone in the School of Irish Studies for having me here today. I'm really excited. I'm also a little bit frazzled because I had a massive puncture on the way here and it was very stressful, so sorry for that. So I'm just going to get started because there's a lot I kind of want to go through today. Kind of just giving an overview of the PhD thesis, which started in 1904 up until 1940. So many of us are familiar with the Gaelic League's work during the Irish Revival period at the turn of the 20th century. Little attention has been given thus far, however, to the achievements of the Irish language summer colleges during this period, and indeed their far-reaching influence on the history, culture, politics, and of course, language movement in Ireland pre- and post-partition. The Irish colleges were highly praised and recognised in their day as unique educational institutions, teaching the Irish language, Irish history, and related subjects. I've chosen a quote for the title of this paper from Eoin McNeill that strikes at the very heart of the scholarly under-recognition of the colleges, that is, their association with the League. McNeill's words here are apt, as the colleges blossomed as a result of the Gaelic League revivalist endeavour, and indeed supported the League's most important victories. Yet in many ways, their lasting success of 120 years is due to their very independence. In this paper, I'd like to give you an insight to the history of the colleges between 1904 and 1940, and hopefully deepen your understanding of how they became the institutions we know today, that thousands of teenagers continue to attend on an annual basis. So, what exactly led to the establishment of the first Irish college in 1904? Well, this was largely to do with the National School System of Education introduced in 1831, primary level schooling available through the English language only. The intended anti-nationalist effect of this system in Ireland is clear and is reflected in contemporary reports such as this from the Chief Inspector of National Schools in 1855 that admits, quote, "We are quietly but certainly destroying the national legend, the national music, and the national language of this country." And indeed, the national school system as a colonial tool is the subject of Pearce's famous murder machine, quoted here on screen. By the turn of the 20th century, however, Ireland would see a renewed interest in Irish literature, history, and culture, as part of what is now commonly termed the Irish Revival period. In 1893, Conradh na Gaeilge, or the Gaelic League, was formed. the most influential and enduring revivalist organisation. As Rina Nakungal has written, the League quickly identified children as vital for the dissemination of the language throughout the country. Yet, given the omission of Irish from the national school system, the task which faced it was daunting. The League's greatest success in this context came in 1904, when it succeeded in its campaign for a bilingual programme of instruction to be introduced in schools in both Irish-speaking and bilingual districts. Certain challenges presented themselves with the advent of the bilingual programme, however. Namely, the teachers were not fluent in Irish, nor trained in appropriate methodologies to teach Irish. Since teacher training colleges at this time largely ignored the language, an alternative was needed to implement the bilingual programme in the nation's classrooms. It was in these circumstances that members of the League founded the first summer college for the training of teachers of Irish in 1904, in the Irish-speaking area of Ballingeary, County Cork. It was predominantly adults then that made up the early demographics of the Irish colleges, and this is a picture here from Coláiste Moon, the first college in 1905. So, the institution experienced significant early growth, and by the end of 1906, 7 colleges had been established spanning the 4 provinces. By that stage, the National Board of Education recognised that the colleges were training a substantial number of teachers in respect of the bilingual programme, and it announced that it would award official recognition and grants to the colleges from 1907 onwards, a highly significant factor in the development of the institution. The essential work the colleges were doing in this regard is clear in this report from the Westmeath Independent in 1907, which states, "The teaching of Irish has been effective in a large number of schools in the past, owing to the lack of training in methods of language teaching on the part of the teachers. As the government training colleges make scant provision for this order of work, the only remedy the managers have is to secure that their teachers are trained in and hold a certificate from one of the Irish colleges." This is one here from the Dingle College in 1913. The unique structure of each college and their independence from external organisations and one another is worth highlighting at this point. While the majority of Irish colleges were established in Irish-speaking or Gaelic areas, this was not always the case. As we're together in Belfast today, I'd now like to take the Belfast colleges as a case study, which offers insights into the unique structure and fierce independence of the Irish colleges. So, the first Irish college established in Ulster in 1905 was the 3rd college in Ireland and was of an entirely new format. Located in an urban, non-Irish speaking area and opening during the winter rather than the summer months. This was Coláiste Moon in Belfast, which had been established off the back of a series of Irish classes taught by a Munsterman named Sean O'Cahine. This format would prove successful and was followed by other colleges later established in Belfast and Dublin. There was, however, an ongoing controversy surrounding Belfast Coláiste Moon, as all the teaching was done through the Munster dialect of Irish. A resolution adopted at a meeting of Dáil Ulla of the Gaelic League in 1908 stated that we request the Belfast Coláiste Counter to provide that at least one of their language teachers in Coláiste Moon shall be a speaker of Ulster Irish. Little changed practically, and at the January 1909 meeting of Dáil Ulla, it was stated, quote, that we think the practical exclusion of Irish from the training colleges for teachers in Belfast is calculated to retard the spread of Irish in Ulster, and is likely to injure the prospects of the teachers who get certificates without a knowledge of Ulster Irish. The management of Coláiste Moon were not happy that they were being asked to place Ulster Irish on the same footing as Munster Irish, and stated that they would have nothing to do with the Belfast League from then on. A contemporary report in Enclave Sullish, the League's newspaper, stated, "It is to be regretted that the Gaelic College controversy still remains unsettled, notwithstanding every effort to effect a settlement. It arose in the first instance when a demand was made that Irish with the Ulster Blast should get a standing of equality in Coláiste Moon, then under the control of the Coláiste Counter. This reasonable demand was met by the Managing Committee of Coláiste Moon, which had been appointed by the Coláiste Counter, declaring its independence of the parent body and refusing to vacate office at the end of the year. Continuous disagreements regarding the running of Coláiste Moon led to the decision that a new Irish college should be established under the Belfast Gaelic League, which would have, quote, a frankly Ulster basis and outlook. This resulted in the opening of an art school Ultach in October 1911. Dáil Ulla backed the art school and publicly encouraged students of Irish in Ulster to attend that Irish college. But while the new art school would be completely vested in the League, it wouldn't receive official recognition from the National Board until 1914 due to their prior recognition of Coláiste Choil. Because of the delay in obtaining official recognition, Dáil Ulla established a scholarship scheme for students of the art school to attend Coláiste Ulla in Clachanally, Donegal, where they could achieve official certification in the language. The Gaelic College controversy offers a particular insight into the fierce independence of the Irish colleges, and particularly highlights how their relationship with the League and other external bodies could fluctuate. So I'd like to turn now to Irish college curricula and begin with their work on teaching methodologies. The principal teaching method used in the Irish colleges during this period was the direct method, which had come to the fore in the United States and in mainland Europe at the turn of the 20th century. Academic methods focusing on grammar exercises and written translation were normally used for second language acquisition at this time, and this was widespread throughout schools in the British Empire, including Ireland. The direct method, by contrast, placed the spoken language at the centre of its rhetoric, focusing on oral description, questions and answers in the second language, immersing the learner completely. While the Gaelic League has largely been credited for the widespread implementation of this method in Ireland, I argue that it was the Irish colleges that really drove and championed this method. The direct method was used almost unanimously by the colleges until about 1913, alongside special criticism classes where students could prepare and present a lesson, receiving feedback from peers and professors. Some colleges, such as Coláiste Ulla and Coláiste Moon, even had arrangements with local national schools that would allow teachers attending the colleges to conduct practice lessons with the children, thus gaining valuable teaching experience. The independence and constant debating with one another as a feature of the Irish colleges is also particularly evident in terms of methodological debates of this period. In 1913, Eoin McNeill, Principal Professor of Coláiste Bhríde in Omeath, County Louth, heavily criticised the use of the direct method in Irish colleges for being too focused on grammar and practising stilted conversation which didn't reflect the Irish of native speakers. That same year, in 1913, a summer school called Scoil Bhríde opened in Downpatrick, County Down, which widely advertised that the school's main aim was teaching conversational Irish. The school's principal, one Father Donald O'Toole, claimed that he could make fluent speakers of beginners within 6 months. O'Toole was of the same view as McNeill on teaching methods, agreeing that oral Irish should be taught to school children first and foremost, before tackling reading and writing. O'Toole's method was quickly baptised Mo na Ráite, or the phrase method, as it was based on the phraseology of native speakers instead of what were often termed the unnatural or academic sentence structures of the direct method. Significant figures in the Ulster language movement publicly supported the phrase method, such as Seamus O'Griana, widely considered the first Irish language novelist, who said in 1918, "Those who learn Irish by this method will be speakers long before those who begin with grammar and phonetics." O'Toole published a handbook on the method, pictured here in 1919, of which McNeill remarked, "Before I became aware of its success, I had begun to despair of depending on schools and teachers for the spread of Irish. Now I am confident that the schools and teachers will be the chief means of re-establishing our national language." Very significant words when one considers McNeill's role as Free State Minister for Education later on, and indeed the role Irish has occupied in Free State schools since 1922, which I'll come to towards the end of this presentation. So I'd just like to give a quick insight now to the diversity of Irish college curricula in the early years of the 20th century. As well as providing classes in methodology and the language itself, Irish colleges also provided courses in subjects such as music, dancing, singing, art, Irish national history, which Tim McMahon has written a wonderful article on, and even Latin through Irish. This is an example of Irish college curricula from Coláiste Bhríde Omeath, written by McNeill circa 1912. 2 lectures were given by me each week on Irish history. On an average, about 3 hours a week was given to instruction in Irish folk music and Irish dancing, under the competent instruction of Peadar O'Dúda. A special lecture on the teaching of Irish history was given by the foremost living historian of Ireland, Mrs. Alice Stopford Green, and was followed by a discussion in which a number of the students took part on the subject of the opportunities for teaching Irish history in the primary schools. Another example here on screen from Belfast College to Hull highlights lectures in reading, poetry, grammar, composition, method, phonetics, Irish history, Irish literature, Middle Irish, philology, music, antiquities, and art. This example also highlights, quote, a number of public lectures, which was another interesting feature of the colleges during this period. While every college had their set courses, each of them advertised occasional lectures from quote unquote prominent Irish Irelanders on a wide range of subjects. Noted historical figures such as McNeill, Pearse, Agnes O'Farrelly, Eamon de Valera, Mary Hayden, Margaret Jobs, Carol Hardebeck, George Moonan, and Francis Bigger were frequently to be found delivering specialist lectures at one or another of the Irish colleges. One other point I'd like to highlight in particular here is the early educational opportunities the colleges gave to women, not just in terms of attending college courses, but also as regards their own careers in delivering lectures. It really is astounding when one considers that women were not generally allowed to undertake undergraduate degrees in Trinity until 1914 and 1908 for Catholic women in the new National University. And that's something I tried to particularly highlight in the PhD. Also, the respectable mixing of sexes in Irish colleges created the perfect environment for courting, and indeed many of the revolutionary generation met their spouses and formed relationships at Irish colleges that would be crucial to later militaristic events, something which I also examined in the PhD and hope to develop further, but don't have time to talk about today, unfortunately. So in addition to providing official teaching certification in Irish and a wide range of subjects, certain colleges started advertising diploma courses as part of their curricula from 1907 and 1908 onwards, amongst much public debate on the place of Irish in the new National University. Irish college diplomas were advertised as being of an extremely high postgraduate standard and a quote-unquote special distinction. Diplomas range from teaching diplomas to various aspects of Irish studies and could be achieved on the basis of examination and/or original research and the compilation of a thesis. In 1908, for example, Coláiste na Mún advertised, quote, a scheme of awarding diplomas to students, who in addition to a higher course in phonetics and method, also went through a course in Gaelic literature and presented a dissertation showing original research in some department of Gaelic studies. The college also provided classes in research skills, and suggested topics included, quote, an inquiry into the history of Irish literature, a critical study of Irish grammar, little-known grammatical rules or idioms, and comparison of old Irish forms with modern usages. Similarly, the Dublin College of Modern Irish, established in 1913, stipulated that, quote, candidates for the diploma must submit for examination by Professor Bergen and Mr. T.F. O'Reilly some original work dealing with the grammar, the sounds, or the literature of modern Irish, the collation and preparation for the press of a poem or piece of prose from manuscript sources, or the elucidation of grammatical or phonetic phenomena not previously dealt with in published works. College reports detailing certification of students highlight the rarity of achieving such diplomas, further highlighting the high standard of these courses. Indeed, contemporary reports often proclaimed that the colleges were doing university work, and frequently expressed the hope that the colleges could band together under the University Act to form an Irish language subsidiary of the new National University. While this was ultimately never realised, the establishment of third-level diploma courses in various Irish colleges from 1907 onwards clearly highlights the significant role the Irish colleges played in contemporary educational developments. Indeed, the president of the League, Douglas Hyde, himself credited the Irish colleges as fundamental to the League's success in achieving Irish as a matriculation subject to the new university. It was reported in 1910 that Hyde had stated that the victory of Irish as a matriculation subject had been, quote, entirely due to the rank and file, to the colleges, to the College of Ballingeary, the College of Partry, the College of Ring, the Belfast College, and the Leinster College. The information in this slide alone is enough to prompt us to reassess the educational significance of the Irish colleges in the early 20th century. While highlighting their independence from the League, it's also important to recognise their role in achievements usually attributed to the League in general. And some examples of notable figures of the period who managed to achieve Irish college diplomas include Sinead Ní Lanagáin, Piers Baisley, Eamon de Valera, Eamon O'Toole and Sean McCann. So, how did these university-style institutions become the Irish colleges that thousands of teenagers from all across Ireland continue to attend today? This is one of the main questions I considered in my PhD thesis. I wanted to find out when and why the Irish colleges changed from teaching adults to children, as I saw this topic as central to understanding how these colleges have endured for 120 years through monumental changes in Ireland. To begin with, I investigate the presence of children at college courses from the early days. While colleges catered primarily to adult learners at this time, children can also be observed amongst attendees. In 1904, Victor Plarr, a friend of W.B. Yeats, visited Closh na Moon in Ballingeary and wrote of his experience in the Kerryman. Quote, "The college numbered some 40 ardent students, men, lads, young women, and quite young girls with their hair in pigtails. In the very first year of what would become a language learning phenomenon then, children can be observed amongst the ranks of those who chose to seek an education in Irish outside the state system." Contemporary reports of the colleges in Enclave Sullish, the Gaelic League's newspaper, show that slightly older children from intermediate schools also attended, and that both boys and girls made up these attendees. A number of schemes existed to send children to Irish-speaking areas in the early years of the colleges also. The London Gaelic League were among the first to send children to the colleges on the Children's Holiday Prize, a scheme which lasted from 1908 to 1913 at various colleges in Waterford, Mayo, Donegal and Galway, as examined by Máire McCafferty and Rinne na Congal. In 1913, a scheme later named Cuist na Báistí, or the Children's Committee, was initiated by the Belfast Gaelic League, which would prove infinitely influential to the language movement in Ulster. 4 national schoolgirls, which is the picture here, were sent to Coláiste Ulla in Clockaneely, Donegal, for 5 weeks' holidays to learn Irish. The accounts of the girls themselves were subsequently published in Enclave Sullish, which give a great insight into their experience of leaving home for the first time, as so many teenagers still do today when attending Irish colleges. One of the girls, Siobhan Ní Rahilly, describes the loneliness she felt upon arriving in Donegal and how she nearly wrote home for money to return to Belfast. She then goes on to say she's glad she stuck it out, as she wasn't there for long before she preferred it to Belfast 20 times over. This scheme would continue to expand over the years, sending large numbers of school children from Belfast to Irish colleges in Donegal and Louth predominantly. The scheme became even more significant after the partition of Ireland in 1921, as the status of Irish came under threat in the north, as I'll discuss in a minute. So, while Irish colleges had welcomed school children and youth of all ages from the beginning, specific classes tailored to children were not held in the colleges until 1919. In May that year, an Irish college specifically for children was established in Clogherhead, County Louth, where, quote, "school children who have learned a little Irish might easily be made competent speakers by a devoted teacher, who instead of holding classes in a book programme, would keep the children talking Irish in all the play and interest of a summer holiday by the sea." The children's school, or Closh to Ida, was under the charge of Kathleen McGowan, a really interesting figure who had been involved with the London Gaelic League's college scholarships as well, and had also lectured in other colleges. McGowan frequently published her thoughts on the alternative educational needs of children, and was of the opinion that regular classes aimed at adults were not suitable for them. Closh to Ida then was established for the sole purpose of giving children an enjoyable education in the language, and was described as, quote, "the first venture of its kind in the country." Total immersion education was utilised, but instead of classroom exercises, the children's time was particularly devoted to, quote, "drama, dancing and music, in addition to the ordinary programme of the Irish colleges." The college lasted until the late 1930s, until the emergency period, and received a huge array of students over the years, including notable figures such as Maureen O'Hara. A change in the Irish college movement is evident after the establishment of Coláiste Ide, and its example was quickly followed by new and older colleges alike. From 1919, special classes or schools for children were established in Coláiste Daghlan and Coláiste na Rinne in Waterford, Coláiste na Moon in Cork, and the Dublin College of Modern Irish, while another college catering exclusively for children was established in County Down in 1921. That same year, the Executive Committee of the Gaelic League decided it would ask every Irish college to establish special courses for children. But it is worth noting that it was the Irish colleges themselves, and particularly the example set by Kathleen na Gabhain and Coláiste Ide, that had laid the foundation for an alternative, thoroughly Gaelic education for children, not available to them through the mainstream national school system at the time. The development of Irish college courses for children was, however, severely impacted by the advent of partition. From the end of 1920, Irish education was already, quote, diverging along two separate paths. The Government of Ireland Act saw the creation of two devolved parliaments in the north and south of Ireland, with self-governing powers in certain areas, one of which was education. The creation of the Irish Free State in 1922 and the subsequent opting out of the Unionist majority 6 counties sealed the division of primary level education, with Irish occupying vastly different roles in each system. In the south, the language was placed at the core of the provisional and Free State government's educational policies, reflective of its nation-building attempts. It announced that, quote, in the administration of Irish education, it's the intention of the new government to work with all its might for the strengthening of the national fibre by giving the language, history, music and tradition of Ireland their natural place in the life of Irish schools. From St. Patrick's Day 1922, it was compulsory for every national school in the would-be Free State to provide Irish as an ordinary subject and to use the language when teaching for an hour each day, where a teacher was competent to do so. Following 1922, no language policy regarding Irish was ever developed in the North, and the language in the education system suffered successive attacks by the Unionist majority government, as, quote, interest in the language was itself seen as subversive to the state, according to Aidan McPoley. The status of Irish then was at polar opposite positions across the two primary school systems in Ireland during the 1920s. Despite this, the Irish language summer colleges continued to play a vital role in the language movement both north and south of the border. While certain scholars have asserted that the Free State Irish colleges turned to children completely after the implementation of compulsory Irish in the national schools, this was not the case. In 1922, it quickly became clear that teachers would have a significant role to play in the Free State government's nation-building policies, as the provisional government decided early on it would attempt to revive and re-establish the language through the education system, the very system that had attempted to quash Irish since 1831. It was the independent Irish colleges that had done the majority of teacher training work in Irish between 1904 and 1922, as evident from the figures on screen. But despite this monumental undertaking, it was clear that the majority of national school teachers still had little or no training in the language. Information collected by Arach den Idichais, the precursor to the Department of Education, showed that only 4,874 out of some 12,000 lay national teachers had a qualification in Irish. The department quickly turned to the Irish colleges in an effort to rectify this. Hardly surprising when one considers the high number of Free State officials involved in the Irish colleges prior to 1922. A survey, which is on screen here, was sent to each college to determine their suitability for special summer courses for teachers. The first special course in Irish for teachers, commonly known as An Cursa Gaeilge, ran from the 4th of July to 25th of August 1922 at the Irish summer colleges and at special centres elsewhere. It's hard to prove conclusively whether the 1922 course was compulsory, as Department of Education reports contradict each other. but the annual courses were certainly compulsory for all national teachers under 45 years of age in 1923, 24 and 25, with schools closing for extended periods to facilitate this. An-Cursa was then run on a voluntary basis from 1926 to 28 inclusive, when the Department of Education took over teaching certification in Irish completely. In 1929, the department withdrew the official recognition the Irish college certificates had received for over 20 years, and announced that no certificate would be recognised in future except that achieved as a result of the department's own written examination. During this period, 62%, or the majority of national school teachers in the Free State, qualified to teach Irish as a result of An-Cursa, a hugely substantial feat to accomplish in the first 6 years of the state. Given that the Irish language had been almost completely absent from teacher training colleges prior to this, it's important to recognise that without the Irish colleges, it would have been almost impossible for Irish to be made a compulsory subject at national school level 100 years ago. The 1920s courses can equally be criticised, however, for the department's lack of commitment to innovative teaching methods and their hurry to achieve certified teachers at all costs, ignoring educational advice from Irish college professors. By examining these 1920s courses, we can gain new insights and understandings of the long-term challenges and failures of Irish as a school subject in the South. The status of Irish in the Black North during the 1920s could not have been in more direct opposition to the central role it occupied in the Free State. While the 500,000 children attending national school in the South would now be exposed to Irish on a daily basis, the new Northern government embarked upon a campaign to marginalise the language in the schools as, quote, it was perceived in political terms. Its propagation was considered a threat to the balance of power, which was firmly controlled by the Unionist majority within the 6 counties, as Gabriel Maguire has stated. Funding was immediately withdrawn for the remaining 2 Irish colleges located in the 6 counties, an Artscoil Ultach and Closh Cole of Belfast. Other Irish colleges which had been recognised by the National Board as certified to train teachers in Irish were also refused recognition by the new Northern Ministry of Education. Teachers in the 6 counties wishing to gain certification to teach Irish could now no longer do so by attending Irish colleges. Another factor which led to the emergence of Irish colleges for children in Donegal almost a decade before this would become the norm in the rest of the Free State. Successive restrictions were also announced on the teaching of Irish in primary schools, and by 1927, only 78 schools in the north offered Irish as an optional subject, while just over 1,000 children in the whole 6 counties were studying Irish as an extra. In 1934, grants for the teaching of Irish as an extra subject were completely withdrawn. Those involved in the Northern language movement quickly came to realise that it would be impossible to continue under the Gaelic League after 1922, as the status of Irish was now at polar opposite positions on the 2 sides of the border drawn through Ulster. Agnes O'Farrelly, principal of Closh Ulla in Clockaneely, Donegal, made a public speech in August of 1923, which reflects this concern. Crossing and recrossing the border created by the recent unnatural division of this small island, we realise in its iniquity the crime that's been perpetrated against our nation. It's not as if a hand or a foot were looped off. Some of the vital organs have been withdrawn, with the exclusion of Ullu from the councils and life in Ireland. In addition to this struggle, it became clear before long that the Free State government were expressing a bias towards Munster Irish and neglecting Ulster dialects. There was an urgent need then for establishing an organisation dedicated to the conservation, propagation and revival of the language in Ulster as a whole. This was realised in 1926 with the establishment of Comhaltas Ulla, which immediately announced a Gaeltacht Irish College scholarship scheme for children under 17 years of age in each of the 6 counties, a clear indication of the value of Irish colleges to the language movement in the north. So I'd like to focus now on the valuable and pioneering work done for children in the Ulster Irish colleges during the 20s, when the vast majority of Free State colleges were occupied with the Cursa Gaeilge for teachers. I'm going to focus on Coláiste Bhríde in Ranfast, Donegal, as a case study of this work, and I'd just like to quickly thank the Royal Irish Academy for the funding they gave me to research this project. So, originally established in Omeath, County Louth in 1912, Coláiste Bhríde moved to the Gaeltacht area of Ranfast, Donegal in 1926, as Irish declined in Louth. From its very first year in Ranfast, the college dedicated a portion of its courses wholly to children, and ran Scoil na Báiste, or the Children's School, during the August session. By 1928, 2 out of the 3 sessions of the college were dedicated to the Children's School, and in 1932 it was reported that Ranfast is primarily a children's college. The location of the college in Ranfast bolstered schemes such as Belfast Cuiste na Báiste mentioned previously, who were sending over 80 children to Ranfast by the end of the 20s, which in turn added to the success of the college as an educational institute for children. Special focus was given to enjoyable activities, such as boating, bathing, mountain climbing, and storytelling, all through Irish. The college employed Father O'Toole's phrase method, focusing on teaching native phrases and natural patterns of speech first and foremost, before tackling reading and writing. The acquiring of natural spoken Irish was a particular concern for the college, as the fate of Ulster dialects of Irish came under threat in the wake of partition. In the south, the Free State government was expressing a bias for the Munster dialect, while the northern government was attempting to marginalise Irish in the education system. In 1933, when it was announced that grants for teaching Irish in northern schools would be completely withdrawn, Coláiste Bhríde was reported as being at the centre of the Ulster language movement. As one writer in the Derry Journal put it, "We trust that there will not be one of the 6 counties that will not be represented by several pupils at Ranfast. That will be Gaelic Ulster's real reply to the narrow-minded anti-nationalism of the Unionist majority in the Belfast Parliament." While technically part of the Free State, Irish colleges in Donegal during the 20s began to take on a vital role as institutes of education for northern children, providing the very education which was now absent from their schools, and through which Ulster Irish could also be saved and promoted. It was during this period then that strong cultural connections between Donegal and the 6 counties were fostered, connections that are still fundamental to Irish language communities on both sides of the border today, over a century later. 1933 saw the celebration of 20 years of Belfast Cuiste na Báiste scheme, and the establishment of a new Cuiste na Báiste in the Free State. The scheme was spearheaded by one Micheál An Mhaoláin, a socialist from the Aran Islands who had previously attended courses at Irish colleges and even established an Irish language class while interned in Frangach after the 1916 Rising. The scheme was intended to expose Dublin working class children to the living language in the Gaeltacht as a supplement to the classes they had at school, while enjoying a holiday by the sea not otherwise available to them. Upon their return to Dublin after a month spent in the Gaeltacht, children taking part in the scheme were expected, quote, to render valuable help in the Gaelicisation of the poorer children of Dublin. Like in Belfast, though under different circumstances, this scheme was entirely independent and grassroots based, although it would receive promotion and limited funding from the Fianna Fáil government as part of De Valera's policy to encourage the public to accept greater responsibility for the revival, a policy masterfully outlined by Pádraig McCongal in his PhD thesis. According to Cathal O'Toole, trustee of Cuiste na Báiste, the organisation disapproved of the government's decision to send teachers to the Gaeltacht throughout the 1920s, with the fundamental aim of increasing school children's understanding of the language, when it was the children themselves who should be immersed in the Gaeltacht. Hoping to send around 30 to 50 children in its first year in 1934, the scheme garnered massive support, especially from the Dublin trade unions, and 78 children between 10 to 14 years of age were sent to Spidell and Connemara from 1 month that year. Those wishing to avail of the scheme were required to undergo examination in oral Irish, and to take a vow that they would not speak a word of English in the Gaeltacht. As opposed to earlier years, and indeed to schemes in the north, this scheme was not centred around Irish colleges, but rather around individual Gaeltacht families. Children would lodge with a family with foster parents who acted in local parentis and would immerse the city children in the real life of the Gaeltacht, centred around rural tasks such as turf cutting and seaweed collecting. I'm just going to, I don't know if you'll be able to hear this, hopefully you will. I just want to play you a recording of Seamus O'Murchu, which gives a great insight to his time on the scheme in 1946.
You know, generally I knocked around with this, with the boy at the house, Porrick, who was my age, and I spent most of my time down at the seashore, mostly, and then up on the bog. They all cut turf over there, and I loved that, footing turf, you know, and then when it was harvested, then bagging it up into two pannier baskets, which the donkey carried to bring it down in those small amounts down to the house, where they built a big rick of turf out of the back of the house.
And he goes on to describe what that experience meant to him.
Unfortunately, I went in for the examination the next year in the union, in the bookbinders union, and it nearly broke my heart. I went in, and this guy, I was talking Irish at this stage. I was 13, and he told me, "No, your Irish is good enough. The quick Gaelic and Maire, Elaine Cusho, or Nismo Connemara." It broke my heart, and it's true. I hated leaving Connemara. I went down to the seashore and I climbed out, went out to the sea. There was a big rock out there called Unnottle. And I sat up there looking out to the sea, and all I was going home the next day. It broke my heart. I just loved it. Everything. People over there, they were God's people. They were so nice and so good to us and gentle.
So great insight into the scheme there. Shay O'Hanlon, famed Irish cyclist who went to Connemara 5 times on the Cuishnaboisty scheme during the 1950s, highlights the positive influence of his complete immersion in Irish, from not understanding more than a few words spoken by the Farrantee or man of the house to being able to recite the rosary completely in Irish every night. Writing in 1922, Shay stated, "To this day, I would never say an Our Father, Hail Mary, or in the name of the Father in English." From its inception, Cuishnaboisty experienced much success, with reports stating that children returned from the Gaeltacht completely fluent in Irish. By the end of the 30s, as many as 430 children were being sent on annual Cuishnaboisty schemes, having spread to other cities such as Cork and Tipperary alongside Dublin. The scheme also received national attention, as large companies such as Fry Cadbury and the Irish Independent newspaper began to offer Cuishnaboisty scholarships to children as prizes in promotionary competitions. In addition to this, Irish colleges began advertising that they would welcome children from the Cuishnaboisty scheme, a factor which allows us to further pinpoint the change in demographics at Irish colleges in the Free State to the 1930s, following the end of the Cursa Gaeilge for teachers in the late 1920s. Throughout the 40s, the positive effects of the scheme on Dublin were noted, with Micheál Ó Maoláin paying tribute in 1946, quote, "to the high degree of proficiency in the speaking of the language by the Dublin children examined for scholarships that year." Cuishnaboisty continued independently until 1959, when it was taken over by Gaelic, and it achieved huge success during that 25-year period. Without the link between Gaeltacht people and the urban classes fostered by the Irish colleges from 1904 onwards, schemes such as this could not have succeeded, and many working class children would not have been afforded the opportunity to access the living language, despite it being a cornerstone of the national education system in the Free State from 1922 onwards.
You know?
Oops, sorry. So, the Irish colleges are extremely important historical and educational institutions of themselves, but they also act as a new and significant lens through which to reassess the historical events of the early 20th century. Between 1904 and 1921, the Irish colleges acted as the only educational institution in the country where students could achieve official certification in teaching the language or undertake specialised courses in Irish culture and related subjects. In addition to this, the colleges did Trojan work in developing and utilising modern teaching methods that were completely outside the norm in Ireland and throughout Britain at this time, no matter which language was being taught. When the Irish Free State was established in 1922, the government was heavily dependent on the colleges in two ways. Firstly, there is no way that they could include Irish as the cornerstone of their new education system without the huge work the colleges had achieved in respect of teacher training prior to 1922. In addition to that, the official teacher training colleges still weren't equipped to train a large number of teachers in Irish during the 20s, which led to the government's utilisation of the colleges as a stopgap to train as many teachers as possible while they worked on setting up their own educational institutions and establishing their own qualification procedures. While the majority of Free State Irish colleges were occupied with teacher training, important scholarship schemes and Irish colleges were developed in Ulster to provide educational opportunities for children whose chance to learn Irish in 6 county schools had been removed. In the 1930s, other Irish colleges in the south began to follow the pattern set by Ulster colleges such as Coláiste de Breda and turned towards the youth market, the very demographic which has predominantly attended Irish colleges since. Also during this period, influential Gaelic schemes for city children modelled after Belfast's Cuisteanna Báistí began to develop in the south. Further evidence of the significant and inspirational language work accomplished by the strong links developed between the 6 counties and the Donegal Gaeltacht during the 20s. I argue then that it was from the mid-30s that the demographics of Irish colleges really began to tilt fully towards children, further bolstered in 1960 with the advent of the oral Irish component of the Leaving Cert in the Free State. I hope this paper has given you an insight into a period crucial to the understanding of the Irish summer colleges as the flower of the Gaelic League endeavour by their continued relevance in cultural and educational affairs today, an institution which has been a rite of passage for Irish adults and youth, both north and south, for over a century. I'd like to leave you now with the words of Father Pádraig Ó Doneen, famous lexicographer, can't say that word, who said in 1909 that the future historian of Irish education will probably record that the most notable and significant educational event that took place in Ireland in the early 20th century was the foundation of the Munster Training College at Ballingeary. And I hope I've done justice to those words today. And this is just a very rough list of all the colleges I've found so far between 1904 and 1940. But yeah, there's a bit of chopping and changing, re-establishment, reopening, moving, but that's what I found so far.
Thanks so much for that, Maire. There's so much to take in there, and you covered so much ground in the course of a short paper. Maybe what I'll do is I'll open it up to the floor first to see if anyone has any comments or questions or remarks here. Question?
Going in mind, it's more into just. I wondered what you thought of Dermot McCulloch-Christ, book from Boydell to Globalization's History of the Irish Language, claims that the revivalists were sort of a bit too romantic. They thought that they could revive Irish in 20 years, sort of they established the Gaeltacht and then the Graphic Gaeltacht, and then from there just be a couple of decades really.
Yeah.
What, and obviously that didn't turn out to be the case. But from what you're saying, like, although they might have been a bit too ambitious on like really Gaelicizing Ireland. If the Department of Education hadn't gone, on their methods and like their sort of formal methods, and it had been left largely in the hands of the colleges, do you think it would have been a more successful revival than it was in the end?
Yeah, it depends. I think a lot of the issues of what you're saying of the departments kind of taking over of the Irish colleges and establishing their own things was that they were ignoring the people who had worked in the colleges for the past 20 years, who had developed the innovative teaching methods. Like one example there that I didn't cover was in the pamphlets from the Department of Education, they said there's no time to be wasted speaking to native speakers anymore. They said there's no time for that. You have to read loads of books. So you can see this shift in the 20s where they're saying, yeah, you need to go to the Irish colleges, it's compulsory to do these courses, but you have to do all this prep work, right? And it's all focused on very like academic things. So books, prep writing rather than focusing on actually speaking. This is like the main aspect of the revival, right? Like reviving Irish as a spoken language. So when there's this shift in terms of what they tell them to cover, they also don't let them do their practice criticism classes anymore. They say they don't have time for that either. So it's a hard one to say, but I think a lot of the issues that have stemmed from the revival of Irish through the schools in the South is kind of at this period, where they're taking something that worked so well, you know, in this early period before partition, because people were gone voluntarily. There's an amazing quote, I don't have it here, but from someone saying that the Irish colleges were amazing pre-1922. And then after, they're saying when the government issued a high and mighty notice to everyone that they had to attend, no one wanted to attend anymore. So yeah, I think it's a difficult question, Jamie, but it's really, I think like looking at this period has really given me insights into what has maybe, because I always knew, right, that there's this massive shift between pre-1922 and post. And like a lot of that is ideological, you know, in terms of how the country is, but also keeping those things from the revival. Like today, this is like striking at the heart of the talk, okay? People don't generally recognise the Irish colleges' contribution to the revival. They just kind of take them. I didn't know anything about the Irish colleges when I started. They just take them as something that's been going on. But by kind of reassessing these things, we can gain a better understanding of why these things failed and how we can maybe better understand them. And I think it tells a lot that people are still attending Irish colleges. Like Irish is like to the forefront of the education system in the South. But people leave school with no Irish and they still attend Irish colleges. Like, why would they do that if Irish was okay with skills? And a lot of that is the part, the huge emphasis that was placed on secondary school literature, poetry, like English as well, trying to make it like this is an important language. And, you know, we have all these things as well, but then you're kind of missing the oral basis of primary school. So, yeah, I don't know if that answers your question. I've been on a bit on a rant there, but
I would say, you know, so going like Ada Blackham said, you know, he was picking up on, you know, the emphasis on the spoken, perhaps led some revivalists to think, you know, the spoken is the primary when, you know, people are more literate. And I sort of get why in 20s they thought literacy was more important than the spoken, but yeah, it does answer.
Yeah, and it also kind of strikes at the, like, nothing simple with Irish. Like, you have so many debates, you know, around dialects and things like that. So people felt very disillusioned. Like, you know, if people are saying that Munster Irish is the main dialect, like even Shay O'Hanlon, the guy that said about the rosary in Irish, he said that when he went to Connemara, he couldn't understand a word because they only had Munster Irish at school. So that feeds into it as well.
Sophie, have you a question?
Thank you so much for that. I actually have two questions.
What is your question?
And you can probably maybe guess. One of them is, you mentioned lay teachers going into these. Do you get a lot of religious going?
Obsessed with this question because I really want to, Katrina Delaney in UCD, we are hoping, and we keep putting this on the long finger, we really would love to collaborate on doing something about women religious, because the stuff that I found on that is insane. I wasn't able to put it into the PhD, but it was the winter colleges, right? The ones in Belfast and Dublin. They had special courses just for nuns. And also I found photographs, which I can send you, and it's mental because they are literally in the classroom with regular people. The nuns, pre-Vatican II, like it's mental. Anyway.
Oh, that's amazing.
Yeah.
Yes, please.
So yeah,
publish that.
so interested in that.
Excellent. And the other one is just the whole idea of Irish children up at, well into the 50s being raised for emigration. And I was just wondering if there's any reflection either in the newspapers or in the children's kind of memoirs about that experience of going away for a month, you know, every summer, that separation from the family unit, but kind of not in a safe way.
Sure.
Is there anything on that?
It's kind of hard to find things from children from this period. Really difficult. Like those letters of the girls, the 4 girls from Belfast, are really the only things I found. I found letters from later periods, like kind of 50s and 60s, especially from Coláiste because they have an Irish language secondary school, like a boarding school. So there's loads of things like that. And in those letters, and they're talking about, there's actually a brilliant one in the NLI, this guy writing home to his dad, and he's like, sorry, Dad, I can't use the English lettering system anymore. So he's writing in like the Clode Gaelic, and he's like, sorry, I'm really mixed up. It's really good. But it's interesting because you can see them, and like there's an amazing book called Letters from Irish Colleges. If anyone's heard of it, it kind of goes the whole breadth. I think it was published in the 90s, and it gives like sample letters. And like all of them are like, first few letters are like, I hate this place, the food is disgusting, the weather is hell, I want to come home so bad, I hate everyone. And then next minute is like, they're like, never mind, it's all fine. So yeah, I think from this period, it's really difficult to find things. But yeah, there's probably more stuff out there. But even that letter from these girls, like that one she's talking about, send me money to come home, and then she's like, no, I'm fine. And then one of the other girls, she learned to ride a bike for the first time, and how they'd never seen the sea and stuff. So they are amazing, and I'm so glad they were published, but it is quite difficult to find the ones from children at that time, yeah.
Marie?
Go along with us on Popper Single Shin.
Come on,
So the Keshdom are cushion and Borsty. So my question is about cushion and Borsty. Common water of Smanching Treasure well on Spidgels and the Quigley. My mother and my aunt spent time in the Guelph in Spittle in the 1950s. I was fortunate Scholaria of VEC coming in here, so they went on a Westmeath County VEC scholarship. Your paper looked more at urban working class children from the cities, and my relatives would be fairly farm labourers, kids from rural Ireland, who basically the VEC was set up in times of a few years of post-primary education. Did you come across much more? Could you say a bit more about the cohort that was going there? Was this phenomenon, were all the VECs giving these scholarships? Was there a more rural community going to it?
Yeah, so that's actually really interesting, because so during how it initially started was totally centered on trade unions in Dublin, and then it started spreading out. So in the 50s, you start seeing, after kind of when it's coming towards the time to be taken over by Gaelic, but just before that, they start opening Cuishna Báistí up for loads of other things like guards, army children, loads of things like that. Also, the clips I played there are actually my granddad. He went on that scheme. That was him speaking, the one where he said he was sad. But he went with a guy from Athlone, who I think was a farming background. He's in this picture. Dado took this picture here. But it's really hard because I really wanted to include Cuishna Báistí, but it was at the very end of this period. So, but I will say the amount of things I found on it is insane. And it starts spreading to so many other, areas and different factions. And I'd love to do more work on it because it's just so interesting. But you can see that shift away from it, because then even like separate schools start saying that they're basically, they like Fry Cabri and Irish Independent and all the guards, they set up their own kind of pool as part of the overall Cuishna Báistí. So it starts off just trade unions. Then you see schools contributing, local businesses, and they're like, this is the Clondalkin Paper Mills Cuishna Báistí scholarships. So I think it's really interesting, and there's so much more work to do on it. And I have so much other stuff I didn't include, but yeah, there's loads to do there, I think. So Vermont.
So, maybe we'll start aiming on them.
Okay. Thank you for that. My knowledge of the college is really just reading the autobiographies of writers like Sean Whelan, who goes off, and John Whelan becomes Sean Whelan at this, and through that. But the other thing that struck me as you were talking was actually you stressed the autonomy of each of these colleges, but there's an extraordinary level of coordination across them. And what we would, you think of modern university, and we're trying to transfer best practice and all the rest. They seem to be doing it with a remarkable efficiency.
This is the thing that, like, I really didn't get into here, but it was this whole chapter I had in the PhD that was like the Nasplachas and Splachas, like the independence and the codependence of the colleges, right? Because even the thing with the Ulster colleges, like the second one that's established just for Ulster Irish, they don't get recognised. So then they have to establish scholarships for the Coláiste Ulla and Clackaneely. So there is some level of cooperation. What really gets them cooperating is they establish an independent conference of Irish colleges, which I didn't go through here, but they meet a lot. They go through, they set standards, they set the certification standards, the rules, everything with the national board. But what's interesting about that again is some people refuse to attend that conference, like the Irish Ulta, because they say your conference is too independent. We're completely under the Gaelic League. So it's this constant toing and froing between, like, every college also has their specialization. Like, I know Owen McNeil came up a lot in this talk. I don't know how that happened, but anyway, that college was so focused on history, and other colleges were very focused on education methods. But they do work together a lot. And really interestingly, the colleges actually came together and met so often. Even they came together on Easter Sunday, 1916, in Dublin, to talk about how they were doing and the standards. And every college established after Coláiste really does follow its pattern, until people start getting disillusioned and saying, like, why are you focusing on this method, blah, blah, blah. But it's like the pattern that's set by Coláiste is really followed by the Irish colleges. But you're right, it's crazy how they were able to have such high standards. And you look back at a few examination things that I found, and I'm just blown away by the standard. It is, and this is one thing I wanted to kind of highlight here was that, like, at the time, people were saying they regarded these colleges as third level, really. So it's fascinating because they're so independent of themselves, but the movement is an independent movement together. So, yeah, thanks.
Tá gá question. So cé ceist module leis na scoláireachtaí. Conor stopú ag tuairt na scoláireachtaí sin ó chomhlachtaí ar an Cadbury agus rudaí mar sin, was an darna ceist ó héad na scoláireachtaí arís. Na daoine nach mhór scoláireacht, an rá cadachú fós dul nó róir who íochas nó cumébrid.
Yeah, so like leis na Coláiste So just a question about the scholarships, like when did the scholarships kind of end in general? Do people attend colleges without scholarships? So Sinead, like going through Vichy their fall the Gothic. So basically, I'm just going to say this whole question answering in English, but basically at the start, the colleges, you did pay for them, right? But a lot of places would back. So like the main places you see scholarships coming from are the League, branches of the League, schools, Feshna, all these things, GAA, all these different companies start coming in and giving different scholarships. But you could always attend off your own back. But the thing is, they were cheap. Like they were very cheap at the start, like pre-1920s. And also, if you couldn't afford it, they were always posting stuff about how, you know, if it was this amount, you could split here. And a lot of the teachers then came and said, they didn't pay them a salary for teaching. So they called them all professors. They were like the amount of people that were lecturing in the Irish colleges and lecturing in university, and they didn't take any fee. They did it all like our son Lakusha Maria. So it's really interesting. But with the question of Bosch-D scholarships, the Fry Cadbury is interesting because they actually only established a factory in Ireland, like I think it's 1933, and then 3 years later they're already giving scholarships. But for Fry Cadbury, I think they saw it as a way to market themselves in Ireland, because what they had for their examinations was school children had to write an essay in Irish about the history of cocoa. And then they also set the school's special chart that was like the health benefits of chocolate, but it was all in Irish. I contacted Cadbury, but they don't have anything in the archives, they told me, which is so sad. But yeah, so that's just kind of general. So for me, my question.
Yeah, I want to go to my good cost trade I goulet in your cookie, the milk to bleed. Kite may a while, níor airg rófáling, so brackwilta.
Sure.
Yeah, well, John quit 5 in England first. Yeah, Sean, the question I have leads on from Eamon's, I think. The Luit to a Moldira,
Sure.
the direct method. Now, when I was going through the secondary school system, yeah, there is Bain or Bear and Moldira. I mean, it was grammar and writing that the major emphasis was on.
Sure.
And this is why I'm a little bit puzzled by what you say, better good than more. Okay. It sounds as if the influence of these Irish colleges didn't filter through to the Department of Education.
Absolutely.
So that, isn't that a curious time lag?
It is.
I mean, eventually it got through, but after my time.
Yeah, no, absolutely, and that is at the very heart of it. Like in the 20s, they're kind of, even though so many people in the Free State government had been involved with the Irish colleges and debates in methodology, they seem to be so under this idea of training as many teachers as possible, and then training as, like, not training, but giving as many children as possible Irish, that they kind of forget about all these debates and so basically in 1922 they say the direct method is the method going to be used in schools. So they do say that, right? But they ignore a lot of the ideal elements of the Modira, like, which is, you know, for teacher training, the criticism classes, trying to create sentences that are not just really stilted, and then they kind of slowly form into writing things out, going back almost to those academic methods that the Modira had been a reaction to. So it is difficult, and yeah, they do completely, I think, ignore a lot of the work that had happened in their effort to, because Irish is so part of their idea of what this new state is, of what the self-defining element of the state is, that they need to say that we're training teachers, children are getting Irish in school every day. Second level is very academic. People are learning literature, poetry, and it feeds on from this idea, which is still part of schooling today, that theoretically you're supposed to be leaving primary school fluent in Irish. Because if you can't speak English and you go to secondary school and you're learning Macbeth and poetry, you're not going to feel good about yourself. And this is one of these things which is still kind of clearly delineated between primary school. You should be coming from that fluent so that you can tackle these tasks. But going back 100 years, these ideas around methodology didn't translate, and the department gets very focused on telling teachers what to do, and the teachers are hating it because they cut their pay. They also, what was the other aspect that I was going to mention there? Their exam for qualification post 1929 is a written exam only, and the professors from the Irish colleges write a public letter to say this is educationally unsound and rejected by educational authorities years ago. They said the basis of achieving certification based on examination only is wholly unsound, and they just ignore that. So I think it gives new insight. It doesn't explain everything because, you know, there's so many things happening in this period, but I think it kind of gives an insight into what's happening, that a lot of the stuff is ignored because they're rushing.
Never seen a talk with this many demands for questions. I'm going to go to Jerry and then I'll come back to you.
I'm old enough to actually go on to one of these colleges in 1963, and my experience of it was exactly as you mentioned there. I mean, 2 days of desolate depression, followed by never going home again. So, not in 1963, it was actually in Cushendole in County Antrim, which I suppose is a bit of an outlier.
Yeah,
You know, and I was just wondering whether you have any plans to maybe extend the range of your study to the 60s.
Oh, I'd love to. Yeah.
Offering yourself as
I start,
Yeah, well, actually, that was one thing we were kind of thinking of including initially, because actually when I started this, it was meant to, I don't know how this was ever a thing, but it was meant to cover 1904 to 2020, which is insane. So, yeah, like, absolutely, and I think that period, like, following on from, like, I kind of wrap up at the end with Krishna Boshi and another organisation that I didn't mention, which is Clan na HÉireann, and in the 40s, and I'd love to look at then, you know, emergency, post-emergency, 50s, 60s, then you get into really interesting, like, Irish is now an oral part of the Leaving Cert exam in the South. I would love to do it. But who knows? I don't know. I'm not an academia now. I'm working a 9 to 5, so we'll see. But yeah, maybe just it's so interesting because even there's stuff here that I initially researched because I didn't know what time period that I would go into that I still have, and I find it so amazing. And even like I was in the Cultus Ulla archives in Newry in May, and there was a list of children still being sent on the Krishna Boshi scheme in the 60s from Belfast. And Jerry Adams was on the list, a lot of other people were on the list, yeah. So I need to do some work and see, is that in unbroken succession from 1913? If so, it could be the longest scholarship scheme ever going. But yeah, it like I would love to. It's so interesting. So for me,
James?
I wanted to ask you a question about the colleges as like incubators of regional identity, because from my own research into the Donegal schools, it's like a sort of language tourism experience. It was fierce opposition from Ulster revivalists to the imposition of a national standard orthography, particularly by some of the original teachers from the 1906 college in Buckaneely. I argue that Ulster was unique in that regard, in being like the forefront of resisting a national language. And then it goes back to apparently a discussion that was had in 1903. W. O'Connell said that the revivalists just met and that they had it out amongst themselves about which dialect was the best.
Yeah.
And I kind of just said, you know, they sort of make fun of each other and like, oh, you say this, O'Connell and so on. And they kind of just said, well, may the best man win. So it seems like a sort of unorganized national, we think of national like standards of like, oh, the Germans got together, formed a national standard and so on. It doesn't, as far as I can tell, it doesn't seem to be the Irish way. And why, if that's true, why is that the way they did it?
Yeah, well, look, this goes on forever, you know, like there's, I mean, that's a big thing in the revival, arguing over dialects. You know, like really in the 20s, you can see, I'm like there is this continued kind of fervor then to opposition to a standard following that, because, you know, Ulster has always felt that their dialect is neglected from the early days of the revival. Then when you get to a point where you're left in this weird kind of limbo, where you're in the very, very north, which are technically parts of you are in the south and parts of you are in the north. And in the south, the Free State government is completely ignoring, because that's actually another thing in the Gaelic League during the 20s, the Ulster Irish College, as you say, they write in to say they are absolutely outraged by the lack of Ulster text on the course for teachers. And you can see that. I saw the text list and it's all books from, like the Munster list is like this, Connacht is like this, and Ulster is like 2 or 3 books. So they're not happy about that at all. And like following on from that period, like you can see exactly why that kind of strengthens, right? Because you have that in the south, which are like technically part of Donegal was, and then in the north, Irish is kind of trying to be marginalised by the government. So if Irish is marginalised in 6 counties of Ulster, and then in the south, Ulster Irish is ignored, it's totally, you know, justified to feel like, why should there be a standard that's ignoring, you know, Ulster Irish? And this is a massive debate in the years, you know, previous to that, during the revival, that people are arguing. And yeah, look, it doesn't really ever get resolved, but I love all dialects, so it's fine.
In conscious of time, and I'm sure people have things to get on to. Is there any question online or any final question in the room?
Nothing
There's
on
none online. Any final question from the floor? Okay, well then I'd say we can keep the discussion more. We'll be here as it's go on week as to go on more reach and school bus more going. Thanks.
Go on,